Welcome to the Dole Institute of Politics, and thank you for attending this evening's program. The Dole Student Advisory Board is composed of KU students committed to the bipartisan mission of the Dole Institute. Members of the SAB receive great opportunities to network with our special guests and preference when applying for our internship assistance program or for paid student positions at the Institute. If you are a student and would like to join, please contact the Dole Institute. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. After the interview, we will have some time for audience questions and answers. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and a student helper with a microphone will come to you. Please ask just one brief question. If at any time during the program you have difficulty hearing, please alert one of our staff members or student volunteers, and they will come to you and assist. And now, please welcome the Associate Director, Dr. Barbara Ballard.
Thank you very much, Miranda. Good evening, and we certainly welcome you to the Dole Institute of Politics at the University of Kansas and to our 2015 Presidential Lecture Series, the First Woman President 2.0. We are delighted that you have joined us for this part one of our four-part series. Please keep in mind February the 17th, February the 24th, and March 4th as our dates. Before I introduce our special guest this evening, I would like to provide you with a few announcements. First, we'd like to thank each of our friends of the Dole Institute who are here tonight for all of their support. If you are not already a member, please consider contacting us to join. Second, a full schedule of Dole Institute events can be found on our website, doleinstitute.org. Please note, we have a special Dole Archives program that will be visiting Topeka on Thursday, February 26th at Washburn University. Please check our website for details. Due to Secretary Sebelius' schedule, we will need to get her out quickly this evening. We appreciate your understanding and your support. Lastly, we're here tonight to discuss women in leadership. We ask that you please keep your questions germane to this topic. In the legislature, germane is pretty broad. Please stay germane. And now I'd like to introduce you to tonight's speaker. We are thrilled to have her with us. We're absolutely delighted, and we are so happy with all of you who turned out. We do not have a seat in this place this evening, so thank you so very much. So what would I say in introducing her? I'm going to keep it very simple and tell you things that you know because you made a lot of this possible. First of all, I'll say she's the former Kansas State legislator. She's a former Kansas Insurance Commissioner. She's a former governor of Kansas, and she's a former U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services. When you have that many titles, all you can do is come out of that room, and all of you can simply give her a round of applause because it is our honor and our privilege to have Secretary Sebelius with us this evening. Yep. And might I say, Bill Lacey, Director of the Dole Institute of Politics, will be interviewing our guest this evening.
Well, thank you for coming out tonight, everyone. We really appreciate the support, and thanks to everybody who's patient enough to stand at the very back of the room, and also the folks in the Simons Media Room. So, welcome, Madam Secretary. It's great to have you back at the Dole Institute.
Nice to be here, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Let's start with a question about your upbringing and your education and kind of what got you into public service.
Well, I was raised in Cincinnati, Ohio, and my father ran for...
Her microphone isn't working.
Okay. It's kind of like the website, you know. It works. So, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio. My father ran for office for the first time when I was 5. He served in city council, he was in Congress, he was governor of Ohio. We're the only father-daughter governors in the history of the United States. So I really thought what people did in the fall was go door to door and put up yard signs. Nobody in my family ever told me it was a voluntary activity, and so it became a part of my life. I also, though, went to an all-girls school from the time I was in kindergarten through senior in high school, and then went to an all-women's college. And that had a particular impact on me because I really grew up in a world where girls did everything. They were the smartest in the class and the dumbest in the class. They were the athletes and the ballerinas. They were the presidents and the treasurers. So it never occurred to me that you couldn't do everything, that there were special rules for girls and boys. And I think that was very helpful in later time when there were opportunities there. So certainly my family background, the notion that service was an important part of our lives, and watching my father do what he did, it was very clear to me that being my father, going into crowds, getting a lot of applause, doing very important work was a much better deal than my mother, who was trying to keep all the pieces together and keep 4 kids on a track. So I thought early on, I think I want to be him, follow what he's doing.
What, one of the things, your career is so long and so distinguished that, as we talked earlier, we're going to have to kind of jump through it rather than maybe cover some of it in depth. But let's skip forward to when you ran for statewide office, and you held 2 statewide offices in Kansas. When you decided to run, what kind of unique challenges did you think you would face because you were a woman?
Well, I know Sandy Prager is here tonight, who was my successor in the office of insurance commissioner. But when I ran for insurance commissioner, there had never been a woman in the office. There had never been a Democrat in the office in the history of the state. And the 2 men who were my immediate successors had both been there a combined 50 years. So this did not seem like a real logical run to make. It wasn't something that people thought was a really good idea. And frankly, I had no idea what went on in the office, which also made the campaign a little interesting. The scariest thing probably I've ever done in politics was make that run. And I did it because I'd been in the legislature and served on the health committee and the insurance committee, and in the early 90s, the Clinton health plan had not passed, but health care was beginning to be discussed. And I kept thinking, the office of insurance commissioner would have an impact on health care and an impact on health insurance. And I decided that to be able to talk about it on the campaign trail, that I should take the test to be an insurance agent. At least it would give me some sense of credentials, and I could say to people, I'm qualified to be an insurance agent. And I studied, learned a little about life insurance and car insurance and health insurance, and went to take the test. And it was a computerized test, and at the bottom of the screen, it said, the results of this test will be sent to the Kansas Insurance Department and to you at your email address. And I thought, while the results were supposed to be private, I was running against the incumbent in the Kansas Insurance Department. And I was pretty sure if I flunked the test, this race was over. So I had to take a really big breath and hit send in order to, and I did pass the test. But I still didn't know really what went on in the office. And when I won, we had a real challenge in trying to figure out actually what people did inside the office. And I had a series of interviews that I will never forget that I would call in directors. This is between November and January when I got sworn in, and basically say, what is it that you do? And they would tell me, and do you do it very well? Sort of, who are you? The most remarkable interview I had was with the head of the Human Relations Department, a man who had been there for a long time, who was in charge of hiring, and virtually everybody in this office was unclassified. They were political. And I said to him, you know, I've been in and out of this office now for a couple of weeks and kind of looking around, and I don't see anybody of color, and I see very few women. Do you have any minorities in this office? And he said to me, this is the head of the personnel department, there are 2 colored girls who work in the basement. So the first person I replaced was him. And I hired a wonderful African-American woman to sit in his chair. I thought that's the way we start the new culture in that personnel department.
And what about running for governor?
Well, running for governor, I served a term in the insurance department, ran for re-election, was successfully re-elected, and there was going to be an open seat for governor, and that seemed like a logical time. There were people who said, you know, don't run this time, you got to wait, you got to figure this out, and particularly because the popular progressive attorney general woman, Carla Stovall, was aiming to run for governor. And there were a lot of my political supporters who said, you'd be great for governor someday, but don't run now because you can't beat Carla. She will be very popular, you have the same views on a lot of things, but you know, she's a Republican, she'll win. And what I knew is that you can't pick your opponents. You just have to sort of pick your time, and felt that I really needed to make the race then. And as it turned out, Carla was in the primary for a while and then dropped out and decided not to complete the race, ended up getting married and taking a different path. So I'm glad I made the choice that I did to run at the time that I did. And that office I knew a little bit more about. I'd been in the legislature. I'd worked closely with Governor Graves while I was insurance commissioner. He had me head up the the children's insurance program. We worked together on a number of issues. So that transition actually was very exciting. I know that a number of my colleagues from that office are here, people who were both in the governor's office and people who served in the cabinet. Joan Wagner, the former Secretary of Revenue, my communications director is here, my chief of staff is here, but that was a wonderful opportunity to serve. But when I got elected to that office, Bill, was 2002. There had only been 13 women in the history of the United States ever elected governor. Now, there are another 12 who have been elected since then, but 35 women total have ever served as governors, and so it's still a bit of a glass ceiling to be the CEO of a state.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, did you find as a woman your reception was any different in either of those 2 posts?
It's an interesting question. Since I've never been a man, I have no idea how. You know, people used to ask me, are you going to run as a woman candidate? And, do I have a choice? I'm not quite sure what the alternative is. I think that Kansas has such a long and rich tradition of women running for office. A little bit of a history lesson. Women voted in Kansas well before they voted nationally. Full suffrage was in Kansas 8 years before the 19th Amendment was passed. But women actually could vote from the time the Constitution was written. White women could vote, first in municipal elections and in city elections. Kansans were electing all women governments before women actually had full suffrage. Mayors and sheriffs and city commissioners. A woman has held virtually, I think, every elected office in the state. And so I think we live in a state where there can be advantages being a woman candidate. Many states that is still a disadvantage, but I think Kansas is not one of them. So if you get to the opportunity to run, I think there is a wide open door in Kansas, and then you just have to prove yourself to be an able candidate.
Can you take some time to share with us how your appointment as Secretary of HHS came about? Give us a little bit of the context and history.
Well, again, that was a little bit of a back and forth. And I think this is in the Axelrod book, so I was actually vetted to be the vice president. The president, now president, called me early on. I had, my son John is here and my daughter-in-law, but John and our older son Ned were very committed to Barack Obama and felt he was an amazing candidate and really pushing me to endorse early and be involved. And in fact, John said to me at one point, and I repeated this often to the president, he said, you know, you've got to get out there now, Mom. He needs old white women. And he did. He did. It was a very wise statement. But I had been an early endorser and had worked on the campaign, and he asked if I would allow myself to be considered for vice president. So we went through that vetting process. And then he immediately came back when he made what I think was a very good choice in Joe Biden and said, but I want you in the administration. You know, if I'm successful, I want you to come into the cabinet. And immediately after the election, we began talking about it. But the two areas that really were of great interest to me were energy, and we had done some interesting things here in Kansas around renewable energy, and I saw that as a path in the future that had to change, and HHS, because of the broad array of not just the possibility of working on comprehensive health care, but children and families issues and science and technology and the whole Food and Drug Administration. I mean, the portfolio was amazing. But Tom Daschle was going to be the nominee for HHS, and I knew that. So I actually told the president after he was elected around Thanksgiving that I wanted to be taken out of consideration for a cabinet post. I really thought I would serve my full term as governor, that maybe there would be a chance to catch up, and you know, there would be openings somewhere in his term and maybe in the second term, and I would. I loved being governor. I had no great interest in leaving the state at all, and you know, the economy was difficult in '08, and so I said, I'm happy to stay. I'll just stay. And then Tom Daschle dropped out of the nomination process in late January, and the president came back to me and said, I'm not offering you this job, but if I offered you this job, would you take it? And I said yes. And then we started the process of, you know, looking at the possibility of being confirmed. And I have to say here in the Dole Center, the person who called me 5 minutes after Tom Daschle dropped out was Bob Dole. They were in the same law firm, and Senator Dole called and said, Kathleen, you have to do this. If he offers you this job, you have to do it, and I will do anything I can to help you be successful in the confirmation process. And he did. He called a lot of people. He spent a lot of time with senators on the other side of the aisle. He came to the confirmation hearings with me. He introduced me. And he gave me a lot of credibility as you know, as somebody who worked across party lines. He was absolutely terrific and continues to be a great friend and supporter.
Mm-hmm. You went from one executive position as governor to another one as a member of the president's cabinet, but they're very, very different positions. Can you kind of describe the transition and what was new about it and what was kind of uncomfortable versus what was really kind of the same? You were still an executive?
Well, it turns out being a governor is great training to be a cabinet officer. The rhythm is a lot the same. You are a CEO. It's a CEO on steroids in the cabinet. Just a little snapshot of HHS, 11 operating divisions from the Food and Drug Administration and the National Institutes of Health to Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, 90,000 employees, just under $1 trillion budget. So it's a kind of big operation. But it's the same kind of theory of picking the best and the brightest people to head those departments, helping them to do a good job. The real difference for me was I had a boss again. Now I like the boss, but it is you get ready to do something and somebody said, I would say, okay, we're going to propose this, or we're going to move this money here, we're going to see what we can do about this, and they'd say, and we're going to talk to the White House about that. It's like, oh yeah, there's that guy down the street. That's a different rhythm, and there's always, and HHS was one of the department, just as a for instance, we would approach things often from a public health point of view. That might be different than, we had a few tussles with my colleagues at the Department of Agriculture around things like, should you continue to subsidize corn syrup, known to make people obese, and if added to products, it really contributes to the decline of health of a lot of people, and government subsidies may not be the smartest way to improve people's health. The Department of Agriculture sees that through a very different lens. That's important to farmers. It's a critical part of the structure. So the White House becomes the navigator of the ultimate policy, not somebody at HHS.
Mm-hmm. Could you take a moment just to describe the difference in your day-to-day routine, or the similarities in your day-to-day routine when you were governor versus when you were a member of the cabinet?
Well, both were very, very busy, but I'd say I had much more control over the schedule as governor. People planned my day and told me what to do, and in terms of choosing and picking from lots of possibilities. But as secretary, we'd go through that same process, plan a day, and then it would be often blown up by the White House. So the president would say, no, I really need you to come to the Roosevelt Room and be at this 3-hour meeting, and that meant 3 hours of things that had been planned and scheduled would then have to be replanned and rescheduled, or your day would just be extended by 3 hours, or no, you need to fly to X, Y, or Z, or be involved in a global situation. And there were always, I came into the office of secretary in the midst of H1N1, the emerging pandemic. And while it now, in hindsight, seems relatively mild, children were dying, young adults were dying, there was no vaccine, we didn't know how long it would be until there was a vaccine. It was a terrifying time, and it was international from day one. I had never dealt with a pandemic. No one had in 70 years. So a lot of that was just brand new, and you had to sort of make it up as you went along.
What were some of the toughest problems you faced? What I'd like you to do is, if you could just give it an example and explain a little bit as governor and also as secretary of HHS. What was one each of the most difficult issues that you had to resolve, or decisions you had to make?
Well, I don't think there's any question. As governor, I inherited a school finance litigation that had been going on for 9 years and had been in various courts and was really tumultuous. And it took 3 sessions and a special session to finally reach resolution. But that was a constant battle and a very tough issue. And I think at the end of the day, there was a bipartisan compromise and what we thought was a solid way to fund schools into the future, and a big influx of new money into Kansas schools. So it was a difficult problem that took really bringing people to the table over and over again, campaigning inside the state, going from community to community, getting the business community involved, but it was ultimately resolved. Probably the toughest and most focused issue as secretary was the lead up to the passage and then the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And we had a lot of near-death experiences. It looked for a while like the legislation wasn't going to be able to pass after Scott Brown was elected and took the 60th Senate vote away. It was a real battle in between the House and the Senate, there were lots of times where it seemed like this all was going to go down the tubes. And then, you know, the process of just implementing over a 4-year period of time a massive bill like that while everything else was going on in the department, and there were constantly issues and problems. But at the end of the day, it again got put in place. The near-death experiences haven't quite ended yet, but I think the framework is very much there, and I think it'll be there for generations to come.
How large a part of the president's legacy is the Affordable Care Act?
Well, it's a big part. He made the decision very early on to go big, and at every point along the way when people said, oh, do something smaller, you know, insure 5 children and get out of the room, find 3 55-year-olds and give them health care and declare victory, he kept saying, if there is a chance for a comprehensive bill, this is the time. We got to do this. We got to. I mean, he said from the beginning, we have to. You can't fix the economy without fixing healthcare, and I think he was absolutely right. And so he was very much involved, day to day. Roll up your sleeves, continue on, and if there were tough decisions to be made, he's the one who made them.
Mm-hmm. What was he like to work with?
Not surprisingly, I'm a big fan. He's smart. He's funny. He is very. He takes a long-range view. He does not like drama, in terms of, you know, people yelling and screaming and getting all upset. He'd be the one in the room to say, "Calm down. Let's look out. You know, 6 months, a year from now. We got to keep our eye on the horizon. Don't get caught up in this day-to-day, moment-to-moment, back and forth. What is this going to mean? How does this work? How do we make it work?" A very, I think, balanced viewpoint and an amazing personality for that kind of office. Because while it's criticized a lot that he won't, you know, he will not be as emotional as people want him to be. He doesn't get wound up the way people want him to get wound up. I like the fact that you have a calm, consistent, and very thoughtful presence in the Oval Office who is not reacting moment to moment and trying to really figure out how to maximize the opportunity he has and how you get the most out of these 8 years that he's been given by the people of the United States. And he does that every day, gets up every day. He is he likes a little trash talk. I had the chance early on, I didn't really realize how he loves sports. He plays a little basketball, and I had the opportunity, I didn't realize it would be captured on national television, to remind him that I actually made my college basketball team, that he didn't. And that turned out to be a little, whereupon he continued to challenge me, well, come on down, you come and play with us. It's like, no, days are over, playing days are over. And he's fun to be around, he has a good time.
So even you can't share with us that you took him on one-on-one, huh?
No, but I did take him on the golf course, and my partner and I beat him, which he doesn't like very much. But
Okay. You mentioned, Madam Secretary, I believe you said there have been 35 women governors in the country. Why
That's
don't
correct.
more women seek political office in this country?
Well, I think it is, in this forum about a woman becoming president, it is an ongoing problem, filling the pipeline. Right now, less than 20% of the United States Congress are women, and that's an all-time high. 10% of governors are women. A little bit better in state legislatures, it's about 25%, but women are 51% of the population. So we still do not have anywhere near the kind of equal numbers. And here, I know you're going to have as part of this series, somebody from the Barbara Lee Foundation is going to participate in, and that foundation has done a lot of very interesting work around electing a woman president. And what they determined, and this was about 10 years ago, that if you couldn't elect a woman as a CEO of a state, we would have a very hard time in this country electing women as CEO of the country. So they really refocused a lot of their attention on women governors, trying to figure out why more women weren't elected. Because there had been a lot of spectacular candidates before 2002 who had run attorneys general and secretaries of state and others who had experience and talent, and they were not successful at the end of the day. And I mean, what they found is that part of it was voters looked at women differently. You know, and I'm always reminded, one of my great heroines and mentors is Ann Richards, who was a successful governor for a term and then unfortunately was defeated for re-election. But she became a real role model for a lot of us who wanted to run. And Ann told a great story that I used to tell in candidate recruitment classes, and this is all for women. She would say, honey, you know, it's not fair, but here's what they're thinking about you. And you just have to get ready for it, because they're thinking this. They're not going to tell you they're thinking it, but this is what they're going to think about you. If you're single, you couldn't get a man. If you're married, you're neglecting your man. If you're divorced, you couldn't keep a man. And if you're widowed, you killed your man. And she said, it's not fair, but that's what they're thinking. So just get ready to deal with that as you go out to crowds. And I think it's a good lesson. Some people probably are thinking that, you know.
Let's, yes, okay, moving right along. What can we do to get more women to run for public office?
Well, I think women have to be encouraged to run, but also I think we've got to start with some of the dazzling students here and around the country. I think girls have to be ready to take a little bit of a risk. And I have spent a lot of time as an employer, as a mentor, as a political recruiter with possible candidates. And what I find often is that a lot of guys who don't know much about much are ready to put up their hands. You know, I'm ready. Put me in, coach. You know, I'm ready to play. I'm not sure what the game is, but I'm sure I'm skilled and able. And a lot of very talented young women say, you know, I need one more course. I'm not quite ready for that. I've got to get one more piece in the puzzle. I'll, you know, figure it out. And there's something about taking that risk and having the confidence that you just have to, you may not know everything about it, but you got to be able to kick open the door. If I had waited in a number of the races I ran, if I had waited for someone to ask me to run, I wouldn't have ever run. Because there are a lot of pieces of the political machine. I mean, Joan Wagner now is the chairman of the Kansas Democratic Party, but many party chairs are not women, and many of the party operatives are not women. Many of the funders are not familiar with women candidates, are more comfortable. There's a very successful guys network, and they recruit one another. And I think women just have to be ready to break open those doors at a very early stage, and then you find people who are willing to come forward and help and support. But somehow we've got to get a little more risk-taking in younger women and get them engaged and involved. And it's got to start at a very early age where people, again, I had the experience where it never occurred to me that I couldn't run. Or that was not, and I knew that some of these guys were never going to ask me to run, so I just did. But I think that's somewhat unusual, and a lot of people are waiting to be asked.
You shared Governor Richards' story just a few moments ago, and you didn't use these words, these are my words, but you didn't use the word double standard. What kind of double standards do women face in seeking very high office and in holding very high office?
Well, again, I don't think the standards are necessarily unique to politics. I think we've got some major challenges as a country, which is perhaps why we're behind with women in political office, but also behind with women in the boardroom and women who are corporate presidents and women who are university presidents. Our chancellor is here tonight, but again, a unique, position. We're the only industrialized country without sane policies around maternity and paternity leave, around supported child care. So women are often stuck in a situation of having to make very tough choices. Do I parent or do I continue on the work track? We don't have lots of opportunities for flex time or family time. Not that that doesn't impact men, but a lot of the load goes to women. So women take a step back often and are in that situation. I think in the legislature, when I first started to work in the legislature, I was actually lobbying. I was head of a lawyers association, and I think I was one of 4 or 5 women who were paid to lobby at the time. There was always a volunteer from the League of Women Voters, and the whole rest of the group was male, and most of the legislators were male, and you were just looked at differently and expected to jump higher and run faster. And I always liked the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. The Ginger Rogers did everything Fred Astaire did. She just did it backwards and in high heels. That kind of double standard, I think, is very much there. And hopefully, the girls of today see different roles being played by women. We have a colleague, Nancy Parrish, who just stepped down from the bench in Shawnee County, but she was a state legislator. And she served in the Senate, and when she actually got to the Senate and then adopted their youngest child. So he knew her as a senator, and then he saw her go on to the bench. And there were a number of women on the bench in Shawnee County, and at one point, a male judge was appointed, and her son, who was 5 or 6 at the time, went with her to the swearing in. And he said very loudly in the crowd as he watched the swearing in, he said, "Mommy, I didn't know men could be judges." And I thought, that's the kind of place we need to be. It was baffling to him that this guy had a dress on and was there taking the oath of office.
Mm-hmm. In 2016, it appears that on your side of the aisle, Secretary Clinton, depending upon whether or not she runs, maybe Senator Warren might run for president. On the Republican side of the aisle, Carly Fiorina's talking very seriously and actually making steps to running. Do you think America's ready for a woman president?
Oh, I think America's ready. I think we've been ready for a long time. Clearly, America was ready in 2008. I think we were, maybe not when Margaret Chase Smith was there in 1964, but she got 200,000 votes when she was considered for president. There have been only, though, 2 nominees for vice president who were women, none for president yet. One was Sarah Palin in 2008 and Geraldine Ferraro in the late 90s. That's not very many women making their way up the food chain. And I think the voters are ready if they have a candidate to vote for. But they're not going to vote, and I think Geraldine Ferraro and Sarah Palin are great examples. While Ferraro was not successful with the presidential candidate in being elected, I don't think it was because she was a woman or because there was a disagreement with the country that this was a time for a woman. I think also Sarah Palin may have been a choice where people, again, not because she was a woman, I think people were not at all certain that she was ready to be a heartbeat away from the president. and to be elected president potentially if something had happened to John McCain. And I think both of them are good examples of the country looking at women not because they're women, but do they have the qualities that it takes to be the president of the United States? And that's really what we have to get to. I don't think there's any question that if Hillary Clinton runs, there will be no discussion in this country about whether or not she has the qualifications to be president of the United States. Done. Period. I mean, clearly does. Will she win? That will depend on, you know, the race that's run and who the opposition is. But I don't think voters will have any hesitation to say she is enormously well qualified. But I have to, you know, we're in a very weird era, and we talked about this a little bit before, Bill. You know, this 24/7 politics, you're never 10 steps away from a cell phone, taking down every comment, you're never off screen, you're never off camera. Any, you know, possible misstep can be a huge tragedy. And I was thinking, you know, today is Abraham Lincoln's birthday. Abraham Lincoln, before he was elected president of the United States, lost 8 elections, had 2 failed businesses, and a nervous breakdown. You think that that profile of a candidate, male or female, could run today and be successfully elected president of the United States? And think what we would have missed with Abraham Lincoln, right? But I mean, I think there are some, and again, that's not a woman's issue. That is we may be holding people to what is almost an impossibly high standard because people make mistakes and they stumble and they don't always say 100% of the right things and they don't always, but there's no room for error in this current atmosphere.
If you were going to point out a couple of shining stars on either side of the aisle that you would say to our audience tonight, you know, keep an eye on them. Maybe in 4 years, maybe in 8 years, maybe in 12 years, there's somebody who's going to be a real force to be reckoned with nationally. Who would you point out?
Well, I don't think I have a great lens for all of the Republican stars. I know some of the governors. Susana Martina in New Mexico is fabulous and is incredibly capable. There are some, you know, certainly people like Susan Collins and Olympia Snow I knew well, and I'm not sure they will run for president. Kelly Ayotte is somebody who is now in the United States Senate from New Hampshire and is very impressive. There are some, Kamala Harris, who is the Attorney General now in California and is likely to run for Barbara Boxer's seat, is totally spectacular. She's really an incredible talent. There's a young woman who just got elected, the new governor of Rhode Island, Gina Raimondo, who comes out of the private sector, which is a bit unusual, but she ran for state treasurer first, and now she is, she's been elected governor. And so there, you know, there are superstars emerging, I think, on both sides of the aisle that are worth watching, and people, they're dazzling women in state legislators across this country, and that has been a great, I think, way for women to start the race. But hopefully we'll see more attorneys general, more governors, more, and the president often more likely than not, although, you know, certainly Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton are different, come out of those statewide races to go on to office, not necessarily out of the House and Senate. So there's no shortage of talent. We just have to fill that pipeline a little better, I think.
There are quite a few young women here tonight, students, or even women who've already gotten out of college.
Oh, everybody in this audience looks young.
Yes, of course. What would you say to anyone out there who's thinking about running for office? What would you say to encourage them, and what would you say to those who really haven't thought about running for office, about the importance of public service?
Well, I again, grew up in a family where I had no idea what most of my friends' fathers did, but I had a pretty good understanding about what my father did. And he talked about it a lot, but my class could go to the city council and watch the council at work, and they made decisions about urban development, and they talked about various money to schools, and they looked at ways that our city of Cincinnati could improve, and that to me seemed like a very worthwhile way to spend some time and effort, a way to contribute to a community. Certainly state legislators are involved in environmental policy and health policy and education policy, really making a decision about what the future of the state is all about in a way that there are very few other people can do that work and do it to that breadth. It's not that there aren't huge contributions made every day in the private sector, but often it's a more limited scope. A state legislator can look at the whole range of issues. So I think that involvement in public office and public service, whether it's as a candidate or helping somebody run and win, those decisions are going to be made by somebody, and having the best and the brightest take a look at that opportunity is hugely important. I last night attended an event for 2 school board candidates in Topeka, and that's a thankless office in many ways. Difficult. There are always challenging problems in a state like this where the education budgets are being slashed. It's a really tough job to be on the school board. I can't imagine a more important public office right now than to make a determination about what's going to happen to public schools and how the future generation is really going to be equipped to be globally competitive. So I am a huge fan and supporter of public service and public office. And I would say to anybody, and certainly the students here are well equipped to do that. If you're not going to run yourself, get involved with somebody who is going to run and willing to run, and be engaged and involved. We live in a democracy, and I think one of the most terrifying statistics about our current state of political affairs is how few people vote. And not only do we have active voter suppression going on, with real, 50 years after the Voting Rights Act, what we're seeing is people's ability to vote being rolled back in states across this country, including Kansas, making it more difficult for people to vote, as if we had enough people voting in the first place. When you have an election where only half of the eligible voters are registered to begin with, and then a third of those voters come to vote, that's an alarming place to be in a democracy. And I think we have to inspire people to understand that, in a democracy, service is part of the dues that you pay, and certainly voting is part of your daily obligation. And we've got to re-engage people, I think, in public service, public office, being franchised once again, or we'll be in real trouble.
You mentioned, and I actually hadn't thought about asking this until you just mentioned it, but you mentioned if you don't want to run for office or be involved, get with somebody behind the scenes. And I've known several of your folks, right, several of your folks behind the scenes, and I know how competent they are and how capable they are. Speak just for a minute about the importance of, playing that behind the scenes role.
Well, there's nobody who runs for office by themselves. There are people, but you've never heard their name because they don't ever win. I don't think there's any successful person who is elected by yourself, because it really does take a network. And in fact, the candidate often becomes, depending on the office, the candidate becomes more the spokesperson for a, series of ideas and a movement that is represented by a lot of people. It takes a lot of engagement and involvement, and certainly in an office that is in the executive branch, you have to then pivot immediately from campaigning to governing. There are lots of folks who end up being elected and they have no idea what it is they want to do or why they're there. That's a pretty dangerous place to be. So the team that comes together that helps with elections also often is the team that is really looking into the future, saying these are the 5 things that we're going to do. That's the message that you take to voters, but then you have to do them. And that team is totally essential. So somebody who knows a lot more about media than I would ever know, who looks at polling, and the reason you look at polling is not necessarily to figure out what your positions are. That's a pretty dangerous place to be if you're always looking at the changing whims of the population to figure out what your positions are. You look at polling really to figure out where you have to spend your time and energy and who you need to convince, where the voters are who already support your point of view and where the voters might be who need more engagement and more involvement. People who will raise money, people who will help contact their friends and supporters. So that team is essential for any successful candidate. And as I say, you played an enormously important role, and you've been involved in presidential campaigns and in senatorial campaigns up and down the line, so you know how critical that is.
It's a lot of fun, too.
It is a lot of fun.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
We're going to open it up for
Winning
your questions and answers after I have one more question, so if I can get my students out with their microphones, we'll get ready to start in just a second. But I've had a number of people suggest I ask you this, Madam Secretary. What are you up to these days? What are you doing now?
Nothing. I am spending about half my time still in Washington. I have an office there. I'm about to launch a project with the Aspen Institute, a kind of domestic health strategy group. I'm doing a lot of speaking around the country. I am about to join a couple of boards, doing some work on the private sector side with companies in the healthcare space and investors in the healthcare space. And one of the things I get to do that I haven't gotten to do in 30 years is say no. I really don't want to do that. That has been a long time, so it's a good pace. My husband is still on the bench in Topeka and would be here tonight, but the Kansas Bar Association is hosting their yearly dinner tonight to honor judges, and he is part of that process. Our younger son and daughter-in-law are here in Lawrence, so we have a portion of the family here. Our older son, daughter-in-law, and most importantly, 2.5-year-old grandson are in Washington. So I kind of have an anchor baby there who's keeping me pulled back and forth.
Okay, very good. We're opening it up to your questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand. One of our students will come by with a microphone. I believe we're going to have, am I correct, we have someone standing back in Simons, so no, they're supposed to come to you, Christina. If you're in Simons and you have a question, you can come out to Hanson Hall and ask a question. And we would, as Dr. Ballard asked, please keep your questions germane to tonight's topic. Do we have a question? Okay, right here, Joy.
Hi, good evening. Can you talk about how children shaped your experience over the years? Because you've talked about your 2 children, and you've also acknowledged how children can change the woman's experience. Can you talk about your own?
Sure. I have 2 sons. We have 2 sons, and I was actually working for the Trial Lawyers Association in a busy job. When I had both the boys, I worked and traveled a lot. My husband was a pretty busy trial lawyer, and when an opportunity came to run for our local legislative seat, I actually jumped on it in spite of the fact that I really, although I'd grown up in politics and helped a lot of people's campaigns, I really didn't think I'd ever be the candidate. I thought I would be the helper and supporter, and I'd helped our local legislator run. But to me, it was an opportunity, frankly, to go home. The legislature was part-time. We lived in the capital city. My kids were 2 and 5. And it was actually a much more work-friendly environment than the job I had. And for me, it was a bit more of a family balance. So there are a lot of people who look at my resume and say, oh, clearly you ran for the legislature to be governor. And I say, no, really, I ran for the legislature to go home. And it was an important balance to find. I was really fortunate that I had opportunities to balance our family situation with political opportunities. So I was in the legislature for 8 years. My kids were then nearing high school, middle school, high school. And insurance commissioner, that race, although that was a statewide race, it still was an office that I could pretty well balance with our family situation. I didn't run for governor until our younger son was a senior and heading off to college. Our older son, at that point, was in college. And for them, that balance was, I think, important. They didn't have to live as the governor's kids. They didn't have to live under that spotlight going to school, which just creates an additional difficult dynamic. John, who was here at the time, was not at all sure once I got elected, and he was then in college. I will say that I didn't take him to college. My first debate at the Hutchinson State Fair when I ran for governor was his enrollment weekend. So he kind of went to college by himself with some family support, and my brother helped, but I was really torn about that. But I thought it was probably important for me to be on the state fair debate, and he managed to survive just fine and got to college. My father also had not taken me to college. He was involved in a re-election for Congress, and Bobby Kennedy had come to do a fundraiser for him. And somewhere during the course of the fundraiser, I was put in a car with somebody I'd never seen before in my life, driven to the airport, flew to Washington, took a cab, got to college, and I used to say to my father, I'm sure within a week you knew I was gone. I'm sure that occurred to you. And he used to get really hostile. He would say, oh, that never happened. I said, Dad, of course it happened. Do you remember taking me to college? Did you take Donald to college? I think he never felt guilty about it. I felt really guilty about that situation with my kid. But I was really able to balance that and had a very supportive spouse. But I think it's, and again, that's no different for a woman who's running for office or a woman who's trying to do a different kind of job. Having that balance that works, figuring out a work environment that works, a family environment that works, hopefully sharing some of those duties with your spouse and others, and having children who, I think John would tell you that he thought every time people came to the house, we had to have a card table in the front hall. People had name tags and they put checks in the basket. He just thought that's how people had parties and was always baffled if there wasn't people giving checks as they came in the door. So I think kids are more adaptable often than the parents in the social setting, but having a work environment that works is really important.
Okay, do we have somebody in the back? You guys are going to have to kind of wave at me because A, you're way back there, and B, I'm looking at a lot of bright lights, so go ahead.
You said earlier that there was only ever 2 women candidates for the vice president office. Do you think America wants to see a woman vice president before a woman president, or do you think that we the people are ready to let a woman run the show?
Oh, I definitely think that people are ready. I didn't say there were only 2 candidates. There are 2 women who have ever gotten the nomination of the major parties for vice president. There has never been a woman who has gotten the nomination for president. But I think absolutely people are ready. And Hillary Clinton, when she ran in 2008, got 18 million votes, won 21 states. So I think it's a demonstration that people all over this country are ready to have a woman president, and they just haven't made it to the nomination yet. But I don't think it has to be a stair step for vice president to president.
Okay, we have a question right here.
I was taken by your comment early on that you went to a girls' school and that there girls did everything. To what extent would that experience have contributed to your eventual decision to enter public life?
Again, it's hard to separate the educational experience from my family experience, but I didn't really know until I got to college and met a lot of friends who had been in co-ed schools that a lot of girls, particularly my age, I hope this has changed in schools. I hope that there are different messages being sent. But when I grew up, most girls couldn't play sports past the 6th or 7th grade. They just didn't exist for women. You could be a cheerleader, but you couldn't be on the team. A lot of my friends tell me that in their schools, although it wasn't a written rule, it was often a practice rule that girls could be the treasurer, but they couldn't be the president of the class. There was always a guy who was the president of the class. So there were a lot of spoken and unspoken rules and culture. If you were too smart in class, you wouldn't get invited to the party, so a lot of them didn't answer the questions in math class or tried to play a different role. And I think that cultural environment that I was raised in was just free of those barriers, and you didn't have a set of limitations that somebody taught you covertly or overtly that might limit the choices that you made. Again, it doesn't have to be politics, but you know, in the workforce, I went to a school that felt women should learn penmanship, but never taught us to type. And it turned out that was a huge gift. Because when I started applying for a job, I graduated from college in 1970, and if you could type, you were channeled one direction. I talked to a lot, I had no idea what I was going to do in work, but when I said I couldn't type, I remembered the first person I talked to said, well, we think we'll hire you, we'll have you write grants. Well, I couldn't write grants either, but I learned a very different skill than a lot of the women coming right out of school were learning. So I think there just was a different set of rules. And I think for me, you know, not waiting to ask permission, not feeling that I couldn't run if somebody hadn't done it before was really helpful in the, you know, running for the offices that I did.
Okay, do we have a question in the back?
Madam Secretary, I suspect that many of us who came here tonight came to hear your comments on your decree in 2007 to protect the LGBT community and your comments on what Senator Brownback did to rescind that a few days ago.
Well, I frankly have no idea why the governor felt compelled 8 years after an executive order was issued to rescind an executive order that, from all I can tell, seemed to be working very well. I have no idea what problem he is trying to solve. Kansas had passed the marriage amendment in 2005. I had campaigned against it and spoken out against it, but the majority of voters felt that that was an appropriate thing to do. What I was trying to do as an employer of a significant workforce at universities throughout state agencies was send a strong signal that we wanted a diverse and talented workforce, that people would be protected in a work environment, that Kansas was a tolerant state, and that we were open for business, and felt it was an important signal to send. It still is an important signal to send. I find it incredibly distressing that, on the day that the 37th state has now struck down the ban against same-sex marriage, that Kansas would put ourselves on the map as, rescinding an executive order about a tolerant workplace. So it is distressing, but I think we need to make it clear to people around the United States, this is not Kansas. This is not what this state was founded on. This is not what we believe in, and this is not an acceptable policy going forward.
I have a question right here.
Good evening. You briefly mentioned maternity leave this evening, and I just learned that this year America offers only 12 weeks for paternity or maternity leave in comparison to other industrialized countries that offer up to a year, for instance, in Australia. In a way, these 12 weeks make it more difficult for women to lean in, and I was wondering, why do you think this is the case in America, and do you think that it will ever change?
Well, first of all, I wish it were true that we offered 12 weeks, but that isn't the case. Most American work, there is no standard right now for paid maternity leave or paid paternity leave, unlike most countries in the world, industrialized countries. And the paid leave often is widely varied. Some private industries are very generous, others it doesn't exist at all. You can use your vacation time, you can use your sick leave time, but there is not a standard in the United States right now. And I think that's a huge problem in a workforce where the vast majority of families have two members in the workforce. It's a huge problem where people depend on two incomes. If you have to choose between a job and going back to work at a time where a lot of people feel they need more time with their children. So we do not have a sane maternity or paternity leave, nor do we have supportive childcare, which is another piece of the puzzle. Even if you had an extended maternity leave, when you want to return to work, if you can't find affordable childcare, you're still in that catch-22. And so both pieces of that puzzle, I think, are very significant missing pieces for, we'd like to talk about children being our most important resource, and we want family-friendly policies where our structure around work and families is not very friendly to either mothers or fathers, but the burden of that, I think, often falls on women, and it puts them at a disadvantage in the private work sector, it puts them at a disadvantage in the public work sector, it puts them at a disadvantage in politics if they want to try and balance having a family and being a good worker at the same time. I hope it will change, but it's really slow coming.
We have time for a couple more questions, but I wanted to insert, because the Secretary mentioned the Barbara Lee Foundation, a program we did here 9 years ago. Next Tuesday night, Adrienne Kimmel, who is the Executive Director of the Barbara Lee Foundation, will be with us. Hope you can join us next Tuesday, because she'll be talking about a lot of statistical research on women running for office. We have a question right back here.
Good evening, Madam Secretary. What would you say to the Kansans who are still here, who have faced sort of a political and ideological heartbreak after this election cycle? What do you use to keep going in public policy so that you don't just disengage and go into the private sector?
Well, I think that a lot of politics is a bit cyclical, and there's no question, at least from my point of view, this is a low point. Every time I think it can't get worse, it does. So I hesitate to say how low can you go. I mean, I'm hopeful that the coalition that began to come together over the course of the last election will stay together in terms of pushing for progressive policies. Even if they're not successful at the state legislative level, there are lots of areas where I think there can be progress made at the city and local level, school boards, around offices, and get ready for the next time around. Because I think, the election results were that the incumbent governor got less than half of the vote in the last election. But with a third-party candidate taking a slice off the top, he was able to hold his job. But this was not a resounding affirmation that the state was moving in the right direction. And I think every effort needs to be made to make as much progress as possible, to stop the bleeding as much as possible, to hopefully look at the next legislative election and 4 years from now, the next opportunity for statewide elections and make a change. And I think people will be ready for that change, but keeping people engaged and involved is critical during this time. But there are lots of other offices that can be enormously impactful and policies that can be pushed forward.
Okay, we're going to take one last question right back here.
Hi, what a wonderful evening. I had a quick comment and a quick question. First, I have rheumatoid arthritis. My employer doesn't provide insurance, and thanks to you, I have health care insurance. So thank you very much. And secondly, for the young women, we always hear the negativity about being in politics and running for office. What can you tell the young women are the benefits and the joys of being in public office and running for office?
Good question.
Well, I loved it. I mean, I can't imagine anything that I could have been doing for the last 30 years, and I really have been in public office for about that 30-year period of time, where I feel that I first of all could have worked with better, smarter, more dedicated people, that I could have had any sense of impact the way I felt I did in the legislature and as insurance commissioner and as governor and then as secretary, having an opportunity to contribute in a way that was really unique and really had great times along the way. I mean, if you like people and if you like to have an opportunity to contribute and make some decisions about the future, there is no better way to do that than be engaged in public office. You don't have to do it on a full-time basis. You can do a lot of things on a part-time basis, but it's such a robust part of the democracy. And there are fabulous people involved. And we did have a lot of fun along the way and felt like we were doing good work. I mean, to get up every day and feel like you're making a difference. And that, there are opportunities to really impact people you will never see. And the woman who just mentioned her situation with being able to get health insurance, I get stopped every day in the grocery store, in an airport corridor, walking down the street by somebody who says, this is about my mother, this is about me, it's about our kids. What you did, that work that you did, made an enormous difference in our lives. And we are so grateful. And there are millions of those people around. I don't know who gets to do that every day, but I can tell you there's no better feeling than that. There's no better opportunity than to think, the fight that we had on school finance led to some great teachers staying in place led to an expansion of early childhood. There are kids today who are able to get great jobs because they went to a great public school in Kansas. That's a pretty satisfying way to spend a day, and I can't imagine having done anything differently.
Madam Secretary, thanks for getting this series off to a great start. We really appreciate it.